I was looking at the date on my phone this morning, and it really just hit me. Today is Sunday, March 1st, 2026.
2026, yeah. It honestly feels like the last 3 years have just been a complete blur.
A total blur.
Yeah.
I mean, we are so used to having these incredibly capable AI models running locally now on our phones, our laptops, built right into the cars. It's just background noise at this point.
Or it's just infrastructure now.
Exactly. But I was realizing that exactly 3 years ago, March 2023, that was the specific world month that made all of this possible.
Oh, absolutely. The Cambrian explosion of open source AI. If you go back and look at the repository commits, the papers, the sheer chaos online, March 2023 was the absolute turning point.
It really was a perfect storm. You had the underlying technology, all this pent-up demand, and then the leak.
The leak heard around the world.
Let's set the scene a bit. So February 2023, OpenAI is the undisputed king. ChatGPT has been out for a few months, breaking every record for user growth. Google is officially panicking. And then Meta steps up on February 24th with Llama.
Right, large language model Meta AI, which is a really fascinating strategic move by Meta. They announced this family of models, the 7B, 13B, 30B, and 65B versions. And their research paper claimed that these smaller, highly trained models were actually outperforming GPT-3.
Which was a massive claim back then. But there was a catch, right? They didn't just hand it out to everyone.
No, not at all. It was open in name only. It was heavily gated. To get the actual weights, the core brain of the model, you had to be a verified researcher, an academic, or working at a specific NGO. You had to fill out a detailed form, agree to a strict non-commercial license, and wait for Meta to approve you.
They were trying to be responsible, keeping a tight lid on it.
Exactly. They wanted to be seen as responsible custodians of this powerful tech.
But the internet, as we know, absolutely hates gated communities.
It really does, and this is where the timeline goes off the rails. March 3rd, 2023. Barely a week after Meta's big controlled announcement, a user on 4chan, because of course it was 4chan, posts a torrent file.
The username was Laminon, right?
Laminon. You literally cannot write this stuff. So Laminon uploads a torrent containing the full unencrypted weights for all the Llama models. And almost immediately after that, someone opens a pull request on Meta's official GitHub repository.
Wait, on Meta's own page?
On Meta's official Llama repo, just a random user adding a magnet link to the RIA-DM file.
I remember seeing screenshots of that. It was absolute chaos. Meta's legal team was firing off DMCA takedowns left and right between March 4th and March 6th, just desperately trying to scrub it from the web.
Which is like trying to dry up the ocean with a sponge. Once that magnet link hit Hugging Face and all those private Discord servers, it was game over. The model was completely in the wild.
But here's the thing I want to really dig into. Just having the weights, having the file, wasn't actually enough, was it? Because these models were originally designed to run on massive enterprise GPU clusters. I couldn't just casually load a 65 billion parameter model onto my MacBook Pro.
Not initially, no. And that brings us to the very first major technical breakthrough of that insane month. It didn't come from a big corporate lab. It came from an independent developer named Georgi Gerganov.
Right, llama.cpp.
Exactly. Gerganov released llama.cpp on March 10th. And this wasn't just a simple port of the code, it was a masterclass in optimization. The big secret was that he utilized 4-bit quantization.
Let's break down quantization, because I feel like that is the absolute key to the whole local AI revolution. Normally, before this, these models ran at 16-bit precision.
Correct, floating point 16, which means every single parameter, and there are billions of them, takes up a lot of memory. It requires massive amounts of VRAM, video memory on highly expensive server cards.
So what did Gerganov do?
He and the community realized you don't actually need all that mathematical precision for the model to be smart. You can compress those weights down to 4-bit integers. Think of it like taking a giant, uncompressed audio file and converting it into a much smaller MP3.
You lose a tiny fraction of fidelity, but the file size just crashes.
Precisely. You slash the memory requirement by a factor of 4, and there is almost zero perceptual loss in the model's intelligence. Suddenly, that Llama 7B model, which previously needed a dedicated commercial server, could comfortably run in about 4 gigabytes of regular RAM.
And crucially, he optimized it for Apple Silicon.
Yeah.
He used the ARM Neon instruction. So literally overnight, anyone with an M1 or M2 MacBook could run a GPT-3 class model locally on their lap.
That was the exact moment the barrier to entry just shattered. It shifted the entire power dynamic from needing an NVIDIA A100 cluster to just needing a decent laptop.
Okay, so we have the leaked model, we have the optimized engine to run it locally, but Raw Llama wasn't actually a chatbot. It was just a completion engine. If I type, say, what is the capital of France? It might just autocomplete the sentence with, and what is its population?
Right, it didn't know how to talk to you. It wasn't instruction tuned. It didn't know how to follow orders or act like a helpful assistant. And traditionally, fixing that, turning a raw text predictor into a chatbot, was viewed as the ultimate corporate moat.
Because it required massive human labor.
Exactly. You needed thousands of hours of highly paid human contractors to manually write out questions and perfect answers to train the model on how to behave.
Which brings us to March 13th, just 10 days after the leak. Stanford University enters the chat with Alpaca.
Yeah, the team at Stanford Center for Research on Foundation Models, or CRFM, led by Tatsunori B. Hashimoto, working with students like Rohan Tauri. They looked at this raw, leaked llama model and asked a brilliant question: how do we fine-tune this without spending $1 million on human labelers?
And their answer was surprisingly meta. They essentially used AI to teach AI.
The self-instruct method. They didn't hire a single human labeler. Instead, they tapped into OpenAI's TextDaVinci 003 API, which was the model behind early ChatGPT. They fed it prompts basically saying, generate a massive list of difficult tasks, and then write out the correct responses.
So they forced the expensive proprietary corporate model to write the textbook for the cheap open source model.
That is exactly what they did. They generated 52,000 high-quality instruction-following examples, and it cost them barely anything in OpenAI API credits.
Wait, I remember the number being crazy low.
Less than $500 for the data generation?
That's wild. But the actual training, updating the weights of a 7 billion parameter model, surely that required some serious computing power.
Well, this is the second massive technical breakthrough we have to highlight. They didn't retrain the whole model from scratch. They used low-rank adaptation.
LoRA.
LoRA. This is where you freeze the massive main model and just train a tiny, lightweight adapter layer on top of it. Think of it like adding a post-it note with corrections to a heavy textbook, rather than reprinting the entire book. Because they were only training those tiny adapter layers, they managed to do it on just 8 NVIDIA A100 GPUs in about 3 hours.
And the final bill for that entire process.
The total cost Stanford reported to replicate the entire Alpaca run was roughly $600.
$600. That specific number sent absolute shockwaves through Silicon Valley. I remember reading the reactions online. People inside Google and OpenAI were looking at their multi-million-dollar training budgets and realizing the game was fundamentally broken.
It completely vaporized the economic moat. Stanford proved in a weekend that you could create a good enough chatbot one that behaved remarkably like ChatGPT for the price of a cheap plane ticket.
Though, to be totally fair, looking back, Alpaca was pretty rough around the edges.
Oh, it was very rough. It hallucinated constantly. It would confidently make up facts. And the safety filters were practically non-existent. Stanford actually had to take the web demo down around March 21st because of the safety concerns and the skyrocketing hosting costs.
But the genie was out. They took down the demo, but they released the code, the dataset, and the training recipe.
And that recipe changed everything. Once Stanford showed it was mathematically and financially possible, the open source community just looked at it and said, okay, we can do this much better.
Which leads right into the second wave, March 30th, 2023, the Vicuna Model.
Right.
I do miss the naming convention from that era, by the way. Everyone just picked a different llama, alpaca, Vicuna, kanako.
It definitely became a meme.
Yeah.
But Vicuna itself was serious business. This came from the LMSYS Org, which was this powerhouse collaboration between UC Berkeley, CMU, UC San Diego, and MBZUAI. The project was spearheaded by Weilin Sheng and his advisor, Ian Stoica.
Now, Vicuna's big leap forward wasn't really a change in the model architecture, was it? It was entirely about the data. Stanford used synthetic, robot-generated talk. Vicuna went for the real stuff.
Exactly. They scraped ShareGPT.
ShareGPT. That was the Chrome extension where people could publicly share their funny or complex conversations with ChatGPT.
Right. So instead of dry academic AI-generated instructions, Vicuna was trained on 70,000 examples of actual humans interacting with an AI.
Real conversations.
Real messy conversations, arguments, complex coding problems, creative writing, weird role-play scenarios. It captured the actual voice and cadence of a helpful assistant significantly better than Stanford's synthetic data set.
And the performance results were super impressive. I recall the big headline being that it achieved 90% of ChatGPT's quality.
They did claim that, but we do have to put an asterisk next to that metric.
Because of the way they actually measured it, right?
Exactly. Automated benchmarks were failing, so they used GPT-4 to act as the judge. They would show GPT-4 an answer generated by Vicuna and an answer generated by another model, and basically ask GPT-4 to pick the better one.
Which is a bit of a circular logic trap. It's like asking a parent to judge a talent show where their own kid is performing. Obviously, GPT-4 is naturally going to prefer answers that sound exactly like its own stylistic outputs.
It absolutely favors its own style, yes. But even factoring in that inherent bias, the qualitative leap was undeniable. When you actually used Vicuna, it felt fluid. It felt deeply smart. And the craziest part, the training cost dropped even further.
Down to what?
About $300.
So in the span of roughly 2 weeks, the training cost halved, and the overall quality arguably doubled.
That is the exponential compounding curve of open source. And honestly, Vicuna gave us something even more vital than just the model itself. The team realized that static benchmarks, things like MMLU or human evil, were getting saturated and gamed. So they launched the chatbot arena.
The ELO rating system, I still check that leaderboard constantly.
It was a brilliant move. Instead of relying on flawed automated metrics or AI judges, they set up a massive crowdsourced blind A/B test. A user types a prompt, 2 anonymous models generate answers side by side, and the human user votes on the winner. It finally brought true scientific rigor to what was previously just a vibes-based evaluation.
So by the end of March, the landscape has entirely shifted. We have incredibly cheap training methods, we have deep quantization for running things locally, and we have high-quality crowdsourced data sets.
Yeah.
But there was still one massive glaring problem, the elephant in the room.
The legal license.
Right, because Llama was technically stolen property, it was leaked, it was strictly licensed for non-commercial research only. You couldn't build a real product on it.
Wow.
If any serious startup tried to deploy Vicuna to their customers, Meta's legal team would have vaporized them.
Exactly. It was legally radioactive for the enterprise sector. You could play with it on your local machine, but you absolutely could not put it into a commercial product or a boardroom.
Which pushes us into April. And this is where we see the transition from hacker culture into true enterprise readiness.
There were 2 major releases that drove this. First, on April 3rd, you had the Koala model coming out of Berkeley's Bear Lab. They focused incredibly heavily on academic research and data curation. They proved definitively that high-quality, curated public dialogue data mattered far more than just scraping massive quantities of junk.
But Koala was still tied to that LMA license, right?
It was. The actual commercial unlock the moment the dam broke happened on April 12th with Dolly 2.0.
That was from Databricks.
Yes, Databricks. And
Yeah.
they did something incredibly smart. They looked at the legal minefield and sidestepped it entirely. They did not use Llama. Instead, they used a model called Pythia, specifically the 12 billion parameter version.
Pythia was built by Eleuther AI.
Right, exactly. And Pythia already had a fully permissive open source license, but that only solved half the problem. Databricks realized they couldn't use ShareGPT for their training data either.
Because technically, using ChatGPT's output to train a direct commercial competitor is a direct violation of OpenAI's terms of service. It's the whole fruit of the poisonous tree legal doctrine.
Precisely. You can't commercialize data generated by a proprietary rival. So Databricks looked inward. They have over 5,000 employees. Over a single weekend, they ran this massive gamified internal contest. They basically asked their own staff to sit down and manually write out 15,000 high-quality question and answer pairs, brainstorming, summarization, creative writing.
So it was entirely human-generated, completely original, copyright-clear data.
The ultimate cleanroom approach. And because they own the data and used a permissively licensed base model, they were able to release Dolly 2.0 under an Apache 2.0 license.
Which means anyone could use it, modify it, sell it, build a business on it without asking anyone for permission.
It was the first truly open source, commercially usable, instruction-tuned LLM. That was the absolute signal flare for the industry. That was the moment every CTO in the world realized they didn't have to rent their intelligence from Sam Altman anymore. They could actually own it.
It completely de-risked the ecosystem. It proved you could build a vertically integrated, legally safe model for a tiny fraction of the cost of training a massive foundation model from scratch.
It changed the math for every tech company on Earth.
Just talking through this exact timeline right now, the leak happens on March 3rd. Alpaca proves the concept on March 13th.
Yeah.
Vicuna perfects the data on March 30th. And Dolly 2.0 solves the legal issue on April 12th. That entire sequence is roughly 5 weeks.
5 weeks. 39 days that completely rewrote the technological roadmap for the next decade of computing.
It really reminds me of that leaked Google memo that surfaced right around that same time, the famous "We have no moat" memo.
Oh, that was a defining document of the era. An internal Google researcher writing this incredibly candid analysis, basically saying, we are looking over our shoulders at OpenAI, but the real threat is open source. People are out there doing things with $100 in a laptop that we are struggling to do with $10 million in a supercomputer.
It perfectly captured the quiet panic inside those big corporate labs. They realized that while they were bogged down holding committee meetings and multi-week safety reviews, the open source community was just rapidly committing code, breaking things, and iterating daily.
It's the classic bazaar versus the cathedral model of software development. Open source is chaotic, it's decentralized and messy, but it evolves at a staggering speed because you suddenly have tens of thousands of highly motivated eyes looking at the exact same problem.
Yeah, like when Gerganov released llama.cpp. Almost instantly, another developer optimized it for Python. Within hours of that, someone else had Windows support, and then someone else built a clean chat interface.
You simply cannot compete with that kind of decentralized velocity.
And it all hinged on that one initial leak. I still wonder about Laminon. It's been 3 years and we still don't know who it actually was.
Not officially, no. No one has ever claimed responsibility. The leading theory in the community is still that it was likely a researcher at an approved university who had completely legitimate access. Remember, Meta freely gave the unencrypted weights out to academics who asked nicely. It wasn't some sophisticated hack into Meta's secure servers.
It was just someone copying a file.
Exactly. It was almost certainly someone who looked at this incredible technology and decided, this is fundamentally too important to human progress to be locked up in a corporate vault. And they just created a torrent and uploaded the file.
It's such a Promethean moment, stealing fire from the tech gods and just casually handing it over to the 4chan anons.
And look at the ultimate result of that action. Meta eventually capitulated entirely. By the time they released Llama 2 in July of 2023, and later Llama 3, they made them officially open and commercially usable. They realized they couldn't fight the tide of the open source community, so they made a brilliant strategic pivot to surf it instead.
If you can't beat them, become the foundational platform they all build on.
Precisely. By making Llama the default open standard, Meta ensured that the entire global developer ecosystem optimized their tools, their hardware, and their software for Meta's architecture, not Google's and not OpenAI's.
It is deeply ironic when you think about it. That completely illegal, unauthorized leak is probably the exact thing that saved Meta's entire long-term AI strategy.
I would go a step further. I'd argue that the leak saved the entire tech industry from becoming a stagnant monopoly. If Laminon hadn't uploaded that torrent, we might still be living in a reality where only 2 or 3 mega corporations act as the gatekeepers to high-level machine intelligence.
It really highlights the inherent fragility of control in the digital age. We use these grand terms like foundation models and neural weights, but at the end of the day, it is literally just a computer file. It's just a few gigabytes of numbers sitting on a hard drive.
And that is the profound existential lesson of March 2023. You can spend billions of dollars on research, you can hire the smartest PhDs on the planet, you can build the most physically secure data centers in the world, but once that model is fully trained, it can be copied infinitely for zero cost. It is fundamentally non-rivalrous.
You cannot put the genie back in the bottle.
You really can't. And as these models get exponentially more powerful, just looking at what we are running locally today in 2026, that specific lesson is more relevant than ever. The Llama leak proved that advanced intelligence inherently wants to be free, or at the very least that it is mathematically impossible to keep it caged once it exists.